This week's question comes from one of my Bible timeline participants. And again, that's another event in the parish that I'm hoping to offer again soon. Because as she knows, and the other people who've been through the Bible timeline know, that it's a deeply helpful perspective to take on Scripture and on Scripture readings and the place that Scripture takes in our overall spiritual lives. Her question was about feast days in Jewish tradition. She points out that the book of Leviticus specifies that there are 3 days during the year when all devout Jews are required to go to the temple to participate in a feast. And she's absolutely correct about that. Her question was, though, if they're from Capernaum or Nazareth or Bethlehem or someplace far away from Jerusalem, who stays home to take care of the crops and the livestock and the other daily responsibilities that don't just go away when a feast day rolls around. And I think that the problem was even more acute during the time of Jesus, because remember that one of the principal effects of the exile, the civil war in Israel, and the resulting occupation by foreign powers, was that the Jewish people didn't just live in that relatively compact area. They lived now all over the known world, all the way around the Mediterranean Sea, and as far east as Babylon and later Persia. So the question becomes, well, how is a devout Jew supposed to uphold the requirements of the law? And more specifically, even after the return from exile, many of the Jews of that time, the third, second, and first century BC, remained scattered around the world and simply weren't able to go to Jerusalem for the annual feast days. And it's interesting to see how the practice of Jewish faith developed under those circumstances, developed into a way that's very familiar to us today, that for many Jews of that time and of Jesus' time and continuing to today, practice their faith with the local synagogue as the center of Jewish worship and of Jewish practice. So, for example, when a feast day rolled around, it's very likely that they undertook local celebrations of those feast days in order to, again, to fulfill the intent of Mosaic law, even if they weren't able to go to the temple. And I think the insight for Catholics in the 21st century is this. We talk a lot about days of obligation in the church. We know that every Sunday is a day of obligation, and that we know that there are 10 other days scattered around the liturgical year when Mass attendance is obligatory. But the church has always said, if you are ill, or if you are caring for someone who is ill, or if going to Mass would be a grave threat to your life or to your well being, then you are dispensed from that obligation. And, it really is down to the conscience of the individual to understand, am I well enough to go to Mass? Am I caring for someone who may not be well enough to go to Mass? Or, is there something going on? Is there some weather event? Or is there am I living in a war zone and going to Mass would represent a grave threat to me? And again, it's up to each individual person's conscience to determine whether they can go to Mass or not. So I always invite people, to examine their hearts, and I take it as understood that most people are mature enough and wise enough to honestly answer that question. Am I really unable to go to Mass? Or, I could go to Mass, I just chose not to for whatever reason. Vacation is a very common one that people said, oh, well, I was traveling over the weekend and I just couldn't go to Mass. And I remind them, Mass is celebrated 800,000 times a day, every single day. And, you have a plan for everything else when you go out of town. You have gas money, you have socks and underwear, you have a place to stay when you arrive at your destination. I said it's not hard to include celebration and participation at Mass in your plan for your time away. And guess what? You'll probably discover something amazing. You'll see some new art. You'll hear a new preacher. You'll hear different music. But I think the one thing that you will discover is that the thing that is truly meaningful and enduring for you in the celebration of the Mass is the same everywhere you go. And I pray that that's your experience. So, again, whenever you've got a Sunday or a day of obligation coming up, you planned a bunch of other things for that day, make sure that your attendance at Mass is part of that plan. And remember, God really is who he says he is. You are who he says you are, and live the life that he made you to live.